program approval application process for the trade and industry area. My name is Tim Barrett. I am the Trade and Industry Specialist for the Minnesota Department of Education, and we're here to talk today about this process. There's also a process around amendments, but we're not going to cover that in this video. There are a couple of items I would recommend that teachers have on hand so when they're filling out the form. One of them will be having your original program approval that was approved before, whatever your updated version of that is. You might also want to have Table C for reference, and I'll tell you where to find that in a minute. As well as you might have your advisory committee roster that will have your name and contact information for all your committee members. You want to have a list of your courses that you're looking for program approval for, as well as maybe a registration guide. And finally, you might want to have your program syllabi or any other evidence you're going to be using for this application. Now, I've put together some resources for you. They are at this Google Drive here. The link is below. The QR code will get you there as well. Now, I mentioned trade and industry. And you might go, I don't know what that is. What teachers are that? Well, I've got a list of some of the representative names of them right here. So you might be one of these type of teachers. However, it covers more teachers than that. What it is, it's a subset of the giant career and technical education umbrella. That includes other program areas. Trade and industry is a term we use, though, to describe a specific set of program areas. You might refer to them as industrial tech, or technical education, or industrial arts even. But they are the program areas listed below that are tied to a specific license area. It's communications technology, which also includes computer science and informational technology, construction, manufacturing, transportation, which also includes aviation and aerospace. Now, you might hear people refer to this process as programs of study or programs, and they might use that interchangeably at your district level. However, I do want to let you know that programs of study has a very specific definition at the state level as a state-recognized program of study. That is the MDE-approved secondary program that is tied to a Minnesota State post-secondary approved program. Those two together form a state-recognized program of study. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to the link below, which is a guide that we put together that talks more in depth about programs of study. However, just to make it easy, there's some quick ways to understand what it is by understanding what it's not. I've got two examples here. The first is the sound production program you're seeing on the left there. Now, we have a lot of programs like that in the metro area. They're great programs. Students really like them, but we don't have any corresponding post-secondary programs for those students to go to once they're done with high school. So we would not call that a state-recognized program of study. Conversely, we also have a really great gunsmithing program up at Pine Tech. Again, there are no corresponding secondary programs, so we would not call that a program of study either. Today, we're going to really cover, though, the 5 elements that you need to understand about program approval. They're listed here: program design, having an appropriately licensed teacher, having 2 or more non-duplicative courses in each program, having an advisory committee. We're also going to talk a little bit about acknowledgement of a statement of assurances, but we're having a new process for that this year, so I'll explain that towards the end of the video. Now, we're going to talk about each of those elements one by one, but I do want to mention that in addition to using them for compliance, you might also want to be thinking about those elements as you're thinking about your continuous improvement of your program. Because even though we're just talking about minimum standards here, you can build on these things and build out your programs. You might want to be thinking them in terms of, are our existing or new courses really addressing our local workforce needs? Do I have the right kind of course sequences that are encouraging students to move into a particular career pathway? And do we have the right kind of instructional practices or objectives aligned with frameworks that are really addressing our workforce needs? So those are all things you can keep in mind as you're thinking about improvements for your program in the next couple of years. We've created a tool to help you do that, and I've actually lifted this information out of that programs of study guide I just mentioned. This is an example of it here. I pulled it out of that form and put it into a separate form that you will find in the program approval Google Drive that I was talking about earlier. It has 11 different elements that you can look at and help to assess your program. You can look at them and realize, well, Are we needing some work on something? Are we really doing well in one place? What are we going to focus on over the next couple of years? This is a great tool to help you do that. Now, you're probably asking yourself, why do we do this program approval process at all? Well, we do it at the state level because we're required by federal law to provide data about the programs that we are providing federal funding to in the state of Minnesota. Every year, your district turns in what's called a P file. This is an example of it here. And what it does is it collects that information about specific programs, specific courses, as far as individual students, who's taking what courses. And it gives us that information that we then share with the federal government. We also use the information at the state level because it's great for us to understand what are the growing new courses in our area, what are things that maybe people aren't offering as much, where should we be putting our support and our professional development activities. So it's useful for both the feds and for the state. Now, you might see that the district level is important because you have to go through this program approval process so you have access to CTE funding. And there are two different levels of funding that we're talking about that are tied to program approval. The first is this Perkins 5, which is federal funding. That's innovation funding. It's not meant to use to sustain programs. It's meant to enhance or improve programs. Typically, how I see that work in trade and industry is people are purchasing new equipment or updating old equipment using this fund or using it for professional development. We also have a state level funding, which we call state CTE levy or revenue funding, and that is to help your districts offset the costs that they're already doing around your CTE program. This is to help sustain the program. There's a 35% reimbursement currently that we're using for eligible expenditures. So that includes things like your salary and instructional CTE supplies. Now, I want to mention as a side note here, a lot of people, when I say supplies, consumable items, they go, oh, like lumber or gas for your welders or 3D beads, those kinds of things for your 3D printer. Those are all things you can include, but you also want to think about those other small hand tools and power tools that you have in your program that have to be replaced on a kind of regular basis that the students are kind of beating them up pretty hard every year. Those are things you can also include. So don't forget to include things like screw guns and jigsaws and things like that on here because you can get reimbursed for those expenses as well. Now, before we start talking about filling out the form specifically, I do want to make sure you know this is where you find all those documents that we're going to be talking about. You'll see the link above at the top of the page. There are 4 documents we're going to talk about. Number 4, which is that amendment form, we're just going to mention the fact that even though you're doing this process every 5 years, there are opportunities to update things in between, and you can use that amendment form to do that. And we'll be doing that in a separate video, but just be aware that it's available. Now, some other important reminders to be aware of before we get started. When you are doing this application form, you are submitting it by program, not by teacher assignment. In other words, don't give me a form that's filled out for each teacher. Fill it out program by program. If you have 2 teachers in construction, then they should be doing 1 construction application. Also, you don't send these applications directly to me. They need to be sent to the email address at the bottom of the page in red. Now, you can copy me on it so that I know that it's coming in. But if something were to happen, if I was gone for a long period of time for some reason, they would still be able to process your application form. You wouldn't have to be waiting until I returned or whatever would happen. So definitely make sure you send it to that email address when you're done. Now, I've also put together a program approval guide. I'm going to be going through these things on this video, but there's also written instructions on how to fill out each of these tabs. It includes samples of these pages, as well as some charts that explain some of the information we're talking about, as well as some other options for evidence that you can provide. Hold on to this document because, again, if you're adding new programs next year or the future years where you've got new teachers or courses to add, you can use this information to help you kind of guide you through that. And remember that even if you have to do this process every 5 years as part of your consortium, you also can add new programs at any time. Now, let's get to page 1. This is tab 1, which is the first page you're going to fill out. There are actually 2 tabs before this that have the directions and a checklist, but this is the first page in which you have to put information. At the top of this page, you want to list only your trade and industry programs. You don't want to put ag or business or anything else on here, just trade and industry. And folks will ask, well, Tim, can I put them all on there, or do I have to do a separate application for each of our program areas? And I would say that kind of depends on the size of the program. If you only have 30 or 40 courses and maybe 2 or 3 teachers, I would recommend putting everything on one form. That just makes it easier for me to fill out. And when I'm talking back and forth with you, if I have any questions, it makes it easier if everything's in one place. However, in some cases, if you have a very large program, like say St. Paul and Minneapolis, for instance, both have very large communications technology programs, I recommend that they do that as a separate application and then do the rest of their trade and industry programs on a second application. But I'll leave it up to you as to how you want to do that. Now, you also want to list on this line all the people who I might need to contact if I have any questions. You don't need to put anybody on there that you don't want me to reach out to, just people who are going to be answering questions. Now, folks ask, can we have our consortium leader on there because they're helping me work with this? That's perfectly fine. Feel free to list them. However, you don't have to list them if you don't want to. At the bottom, we're going to ask you to identify and provide an email address for your superintendent. Or you might, in kind of rare cases, have a licensed CTE program director. But you can only list them if they have the 000110 license. In most cases, you're going to put a superintendent's name here and give us an email address because we're going to be emailing them part of this process that they have to fill out. Now, moving on to tab 2, we're going to talk about program design. And on this page, there are 3 different elements that we're going to be talking about specifically. The first of those is student leadership. What is your program doing to provide opportunities for students to lead their own learning? You want to list as much as you can on this in this question. If you have a CTSO or a career and technical student organization, you can check it here. And the one for trade and industry is Skills USA. So if you have a current Skills USA chapter, mark it here. If you're going to get one next year, don't mark it here. You can probably put it in the description up above if that's your intent to do that. If you were using FFA or DECA or something like that, another CTSO, then you need on the top line to mention, well, how are your students gaining access to it? How are students using either an ag career development program or a business one to do trade and industry? If you have a reason for that, put it on the line above. Now, there are a couple of different options that teachers have for providing student leadership in trade and industry. The best and easiest is probably Skills USA because that organization is set up just to do this task. However, there are folks who also use other organizations like the robotics groups for their challenges, or super mileage, or if you're doing engineering challenge of some sort, or some of the newer competitions that are growing like drone racing, things like that you can add as well. If for some reason you don't have either a CTSO, a Skills USA chapter, or one of these other organizations, then you need to provide the student leadership through your program. You have to have this element. Now, there are a couple of different ways to do that. They're listed here. There's others in the forums that you'll see. You might have students leading some of the training that they do in your courses. Or if you're doing student projects, you might have rotating team leaders and a 4-person that do that. You might have class mentoring where your advanced students are helping out students in your beginning courses. You may also be providing some kind of in-school or regional skills competition because you're not quite ready to do these other competitions. That's a great way to kind of get students used to the idea and doing it on a lower level, something with a little less stress to it. Or you might be doing a community or service project every year. All of those are fine. You just need to provide evidence of that on those pages. I'll also say that even if you were providing Skills or one of these other organizations, you might still want to consider adding these other elements to your program because not every student is necessarily going to be able to take advantage of being involved with those other organizations. So providing it in class, make sure that more students are getting those opportunities. Now, if we move to the bottom of the page, there's 2 other areas we want to talk about. The first of these is career exploration or experiential learning. You want to provide some information about what are you doing in this area. Again, these are areas you have to provide information. So what are you doing about career exploration? Do you have guest speakers in your class? or do you have job shadows available, or do students do internships? If you have any of that information listed here, I also ask that you give us more specific information. If you have guest speakers, who are they or where are they coming from? If you're doing job shadows, at what companies? Let us know. Provide as much detail as you can. And there are other things you might be providing as well. In beginning classes, you might decide to have students do some self-assessment. What are they good at? What are they interested in? Giving them some ideas where they might want to go as they move into more advanced parts of your program. Then they might be wanting to think about in future classes, what kind of majors do you need to go into, or what are the post-secondary training that I need for these careers? Discuss that with them, provide them with some information about that. And you might also want to say, well, what are the different careers within that career field that you're interested in, or that pathway? If you're interested in construction, what are all the jobs that are available in construction that you might be interested in? However, none of those really replace giving them the experience they can get from going out and meeting with industry people, going to industry sites, so they really get a sense of what it's going to look like when they get into this field. We've put together some resources that are available to you. They're on this trade and industry page. They're also in that program folder that I mentioned. On the left here is a list of different kinds of industry engagements. Not all of these are around career exploration, but a good portion of them are. If you're not sure what they are, you can, on the back side of this document, there's kind of descriptions of each of these, and it's really handy to look at them. In addition, we also have this other resource on the right that we put together to kind of explain how you might want to build out your career exploration program. What are things you might want to be doing at the beginning? Something you do simple. Maybe you have guest speakers right now and you want to expand. What are other things you can do? And what are other people you might want to get involved with those organizations? So in other words, you might have one person come in and do guest speaking from a company, but have somebody else do industry tours when they come out to their facility. That way you're kind of keeping that connection with that industry partner, so it's an industrial relationship and not just a one-on-one that might go away if that person leaves that job. Again, consult these resources either in the folder or at the trade and industry page at MDE. Finally, at the bottom of the page, we want to talk about safety, instruction, and assessment. You want to provide as much detail as you can about what are you doing in the program. How do you make sure that students are being assessed properly? What do you do as far as teaching about safety? Do they have to demonstrate before they can run anything in your shop? Be as specific as you can about that information. If you're kind of rethinking what you're doing around safety, or you're trying to expand what you're doing, we recommend that you look at the safety guidance that we created a couple of years ago. It's a really good resource for trying to figure some of that out. The general resource that you see on the left is the one I would use to kind of understand what are some general recommendations that we provide. In addition, it'll also have a link to these other two documents that we don't have on the website. These are, we keep these just for teachers. So it's the student and teacher curriculum around specific tools. There's about 80 plus that are listed on there. This is all good information, but definitely we recommend that you read through all of it as much as you can. You'll find all of it at this new safety guidance for CTE page that is on the MDE website. It's listed here. There's a link at the bottom of how to reach it, and a QR code will take you there as well. It has a link to that first general safety manual that you can download, as well as some other briefs around very specific safety questions that we hear a lot about, where people want more information or additional resources. So check those out when you go to that page as well. In addition, we have another resource that we want you to consider, and that is the framework that we've created around safety that you'll find in all of the different trade and industry frameworks. I would recommend that every course have at least some health and safety standards embedded in them, things that you want to be covering in every one of your classes, regardless if students are in a lab or in a classroom. There are good things to be thinking about as far as understanding what are the safety requirements in this program area. We've put together this lesson planning tool as a way to help you kind of figure out where and how much do you want to embed these safety frameworks in all of your courses. It's a really good tool to kind of figure that out, to kind of figure yes, no, what are other things we might want to do. I really recommend that you take a look at it. You will find it and all the frameworks on the trade and industry page at the MDE website. Again, link below with a link, the QR code to take you there as well. It lists all of the different frameworks that we have that are available, as well as the support documents I've been talking about. It also has links to national standards in different program areas. So if you're interested in that, you're getting students ready for credential work, it's another place to go look for that information. We have lots of information about program design, as well as advisory committees and industry engagement, recommendations for your syllabi that are listed in this reference document here, which you'll also find in that program approval folder. It's great information for just doing your program approval application, but it's also something you might want to be looking and referencing as you're working on improving your programs. Moving on to tab 3, we're going to talk about teachers' information that we need. The first thing we're going to ask you to do is list all the teachers who are in a specific program area that you're going to want approval for. You want to also list which building specifically they work in. If you only have one building, that's great, but it's better to list it by its full name so I know that that's the only place everyone's working, because I don't know if there might be 2 or more campuses. So make sure that you're listing that information. Then we're going to want you to list all the teacher information, their file folder number, their contact information. When you're doing their file folder numbers, I would recommend that you look them up at the Pelsby license lookup link that's listed below, because I've often found that people have the wrong file folder numbers listed. So it's good to you to go double check, make sure you got the right one, but it's also an opportunity to make sure your teachers have the appropriate licenses for the program areas for which you seek approval. So make sure all that information is there. In addition, you're going to provide us with information, their contact information. A phone number, a direct phone number would be best, and their email address. The reason we want that is in case we have specific questions we might need to ask about a specific program. I also use that information to add people to our contact list so that they're receiving the Trade and Industry newsletter, as well as any other program updates that I want to provide to them. Now, in those resources, you'll also find this chart. So if you're not sure which teachers are supposed to teach in which areas, if they have the right license or not, this chart, which you'll find in a couple of different resources I've created, is a useful tool. Across the top, you see all the programs listed with their program codes. Below are the corresponding license codes that go with that code. So you'll see in the bold there, those 300,000 licenses. Those are the typical licenses we see today for teachers that are teaching in these specific areas. There are some what we call legacy vocational licenses that some people still hold. Nobody can get these now. You can just renew them. They aren't issued anymore. So you may find teachers that have that one as well. I will mention that if you say, well, Tim, what about 100,000 industrial arts or 100 technology licenses? Are those CTE licenses? They aren't. The reason for that is that while those teachers might have the content mastery and the proper pedagogy to teach in a lot of these program areas, what they lack is that CTE core, that foundational knowledge around career and technical education that's required in this area. If you have questions about that, or if you're interested in having teachers that have those licenses to get Tier 1 or out-of-field permissions, you need to talk to Pelsby. That is the Professional Educators Licensing and Standards Board. They're the ones that are in charge of licensing. MDE is not involved with issuing licenses at all. I do provide some information, but these folks are the final authority. One of the items I provide is this decision tree. This is a way to kind of help teachers and administrators navigate the kind of convoluted process of licensing. This looks complicated, but if you start in that upper left-hand corner where it says start here, you just answer questions yes or no. It'll guide you to where you need to go next. It also has a list of the 3 license preparation organizations that help in trade and industry. If you have questions, I recommend reaching out to them and talking with them about your situation. And talk to all 3 because they have different options. All of this information, the decision tree and some other information from each of these organizations, I have listed in this other resource that you'll find in the folder. It does not replace official information. I updated it this spring, but the information can get out of date pretty quickly if they make decisions and changes without notifying me. So always double check with them. You can start here, but double check with Pelsby if you have questions. Now we're going to move on to tab 4, which is the district CTE courses. This is probably the page you're going to spend most of your time on because it's the most information you have to provide me. If you filled out the first tab correctly, then it'll auto-fill on the first 3 columns here. All that information will be put in for you. On the 4th column there, it'll be asking you to provide the building where each of the courses that you're going to be looking for approval on the site. Again, don't provide high school. Put down the specific place where that particular course is taught. It's all the same, that's fine. Once you put it in once, it'll start to autocorrect and fill in for you as well. But make sure you put in that information. Once you've done that, then we start putting in all the courses that you want to seek approval for. You list them all on this page. List them by the title that you use on your syllabi and in your class at your school. I have had instances where people have turned in forms where it'll have one name on this form, another name on the syllabus, and a third name on the electronic folder that they're sending it to me on. That can be really confusing, especially when you have courses that all have similar names. And if there's a number of courses that have woodworking in it, I'm not always sure which one I'm looking at. So try and be as clear and specific as you can. Once you've done that, you're going to start putting in the program and course codes for each of these courses. Now, you can take that information from Table C, or you might be able to also pull some of that information from the program approval that you had from last time, or the program approval database, or the list of approved programs, as we're going to start calling it. Now, you'll find that information again on the program approval page. Table C is that one that's marked 2. 3 is the one that's about the database, which has a list of all the approved courses and programs in the state. This is what Table C looks like. You'll notice that on this column here, it lists all of the licenses that are eligible for this particular program area. In this case, this is for construction. You'll also find generic course descriptions that we've placed on here because, again, it might be difficult to figure out, well, which code should I use? Look at the course description to help you determine which is the closest to what you are actually offering in your class. Now, a lot of folks have started using these as their course description, and that's fine. However, these are generic. They're very general, and there's lots of information in here that may or may not be included in your course. If you don't have it, leave it off. You'll notice the last line here says, these courses may prepare students to pass relevant industry certifications. Well, if they do, then put in that they do. If they don't, just remove that whole sentence. Make sure that you adapt it to what your programs actually and your courses are actually about. Now, this is an example of the program approval database. You'll notice here that what I've circled here are all of the communications technology courses and program for Mankato. Now, they may look at this and say, we want to change some of these codes because these aren't the right codes for the courses now. We've changed the course in some ways, and now we think it should be in a different place. That's fine. You can find that information to start here. What I always say is double check it against Table C to make sure that is how you want to code it. When you're listing programs and courses on this list, make sure that you list them by teacher. So in other words, if you have 2 teachers that are teaching the same course, you list them on separate lines. The reason for that is teachers often will have different kind of licensing status. So I don't want to inadvertently remove or keep on here courses that are approved or not approved. So we want to make sure we can differentiate between the different courses. So list everyone individually. If you have 2 people teaching the same course, put them both on there. Now, on the far right of this same page, you want to be thinking about additional information that we're asking for. There may be cases where you have courses that don't require anything, so you leave it blank. But if, for instance, in this first column, you have somebody that's providing an industry certification or credential, you can list it there. Say one of your construction courses, you're having kids go through and obtain that OSHA 10. Great, list it here. Now, this used to be around credits for academic credits. We decided to get rid of that mainly because we do not approve or not approve academic credit. That's done at the district level. So we've decided to put in the certification instead. If you have them, put them in here. If you also are providing some kind of concurrent or articulated credit with a post-secondary institution, in that second column, list that. In the final column, that's where you want to list the institution that you have that credit associated with. Again, you may or may not have information here, but if you do, please fill it out. Now, we're also going to be asking you to provide us with evidence about each of the courses that you're looking for approval. The easiest evidence that most people provide is a syllabus. And why do we need a syllabus? Well, I'm going to be checking to make sure you've coded the course properly, or if there's information missing that you asked me to look for in the syllabi that's not in the application. If I can't find it in another place, I need to reach out to you, but it's best to put it in the syllabus if you don't have it on the form. Also, I think it's good for you to have that information because your students should know about what they're doing around student leadership and career exploration and safety. Those are all good things to be listing in here. You want to share the good work that you're doing, and you also want to make sure that besides your students, their parents know what's up, your industry partners know what you're providing, and probably most importantly, your administration's aware of what you're doing. Now, we don't have to be just the syllabus. You can provide other evidence. I recommend if you're handing in syllabus that you include your safety instruction information. It's really good for me to understand that, and I think it's great to have it on the form so that your students and their parents know about it. But you could also provide me with a safety handbook and examples of the tests you use. Some people provide both. I think that's great. I will say nobody's turned in too much information. I've never had that experience in 6 years, so feel free to give me as much information as you think I should look at. If you have meeting agenda notes from your advisory committees, that's great, and provide those. Maybe articulation agreements or your program of work for Skills USA. Any kind of evidence like that is great to have as well. Now, we're going to look at the last page on which you need to fill out information, and that's around your advisory committee. Now, what you want to do is you're going to list all the advisory committee members on this information, providing basic information about who they are, where they are from, and some basic contact information. Now, you'll notice we don't have teachers listed on here because teachers are being advised by these advisors. Also, we're not putting on here people who might attend your meetings, but are really there just to listen in, like your superintendent might be coming to your meetings. That would be great. I would recommend that they come to at least 1 or 2 of them. But again, they're not necessarily part of the advisory committee. Put the people on here who are helping to advise the program. We want all that information because if I see a list on here where there's no name, I'm taking it off, or if there's no contact information, I'll take it off because I'm assuming that's not really somebody who's part of your committee. We need at least one of these pieces of contact information just to know that you have ability to connect with these people and have them provide information. We also want you to list where do they work, what is their role there, and how does that apply to which of your programs. For instance, I've had questions where people say, Tim, we have somebody from Marvin Windows on our advisory. Can they provide guidance for the manufacturing program or the construction program or both? So, well, it depends on what they do there. I mean, they very well could provide information for both your program areas, but if they work in HR, maybe they should be on your business CTE program and not the trade and industry one. Don't be putting people on here who can't help advise your program. I've had instances where people say, well, we've got somebody from the local flower shop advising our construction program. I'm going to ask a question of how do they do that? What are they doing to provide that? And you may have one, and that's great. But again, try and have people on here who can help provide information for each of your programs. If you're looking to expand your program so that you have advisory committee members who can speak to each of the areas that you have a program in, we provide a handbook that is really useful for building up your advisory committee, where to look for people, what kind of forms to use, how to run your meetings. It's really a good comprehensive resource, and I heartily recommend that you make use of it. Now, finally, I want to talk about one last item. It's about our statement of assurances. In the past, this was part of the form that you filled out. You had your superintendent sign it. They had to initial it. This year, we're doing a different process. It's going to be a separate process. You're going to do the application and send it in, but we're also going to have your superintendent, whoever you've identified in there, to be the person to fill out this form. We will send them this form. They're going to look at it, review it, and then they're going to sign off on it to say, yes, our district is going to support all of these different elements of this trade and industry program. When all of that's done, we will be sending out a final approval, and that'll be sent to you and your superintendent. However, None of that will happen until all of these forms are sent in. So unless we have both your application form and the signature form all filled out and ready to go, we will not consider your program approved, and you will not get that final approval. So if you haven't got it, that's where you want to check in with your superintendent to make sure they filled out this form. Now, that's all I have. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is there, and good luck with your program approval application.